Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Negligence, the Dylan Redwine story. I'm Eric Carter-Landin, and this is True Consequences. When we last left off, I was speaking with Bob Motta, who is a former defense attorney turned podcaster on the show Defense Diaries. Again, if you haven't checked that show out, please go check it out. We're going to pick up where Bob and I left off last week, talking about the trial. So we left off, we were talking about the trial. We were starting to get into that. And I think that not being a defense attorney, not knowing anything about that world, other than being a family member of a victim, it was very clear. And I almost had a thought early on in the trial. It almost felt like the defense team was being purposely out of it, I guess.
I don't know, man. I just think I just don't think the guy was prepared. You know, it's like I've seen lawyers that kind of wing it in a closing, and I got that distinct feeling because like when a guy just kind of repeats the same shit about 50 times during the closing, you know that number one, that they don't have a strong case because they're trying to, you know, kind of just beat a dead horse with respect to kind of the same point over and over and over. And I really got that feeling like like I said, the first hour of that, like before he kind of like started delving into the evidence, you know, I really just kind of got the feeling like, wow, this guy's really pushing the reasonable doubt angle like hard, you know, which, you know, I always consider that to be like kind of the catch-all, you know, like if you don't have the evidence on your side, you're basically arguing reasonable doubt that they weren't able to prove their case. So as opposed to the evidence not really reflecting that the guy did it, you know what I mean? So that was definitely the feeling I got from them. It was certainly not a sterling performance by the defense. No. And I didn't particularly think that the prosecution was great either. I was relieved that, you know, it went the way that it did, because I think at the end of the day, I think there's no other rational explanation of what happened to this kid. No part of me thinks that he was hiking, you know.
He didn't go fishing.
Didn't go fishing. He wasn't walking 21 fucking miles to his buddy's house, you know, at the crack of dawn. That wasn't happening, you know. And
and that highway, by the way, that they, you know, were trying to say that Mark was trying to say, oh, maybe he went to walk to Ryan's house. That highway is scary as shit to drive on, let alone to walk on.
No way. No 13-year-old kids walking 21 miles. My daughter, my 16-year-old, won't walk like 3 blocks. I'm like, oh, you know, it's like I've turned into my father. You know, I used to have to like walk 4 miles to school every day. You know, she's like, oh my God, you know, with no shoes and the stuff. So it's like, but that's just, you know, that's how kids are. And it's like 13-year-old, it's not happening, dude. And it's like his entire family's like, this kid is not the kid who's going to go fishing. You know, I'm going to wake up real early and go fishing. It's like he had plans. He had plans to see his homie. You know, he had plans to go hang out with his homie. And like, I didn't think that was unusual. Like you said, Mark's romanticizing what he wants his relationship with his son to be. From Dylan's perspective, he's like, I'm 13. I want to go hang out with my friends. I don't want to hang out with my creepy dad. That's what he's thinking, you know, like, so I didn't think that was, you know, like, because the state made a big deal out about that. And I'm like, nah, you know, if I'm a juror and I'm back and trying to like figure out if this guy's guilty or not, and we're back there hashing it out, like those would be things where I'm saying, look, like those aren't compelling to me. That's just a 13-year-old being a 13-year-old. I don't think that it was a situation that The kid was necessarily trying to distance himself from his father. I don't think that it was strange that he didn't want to go. Like that was for many reasons. I think probably the primary reason, I know that grandmother was ill, and and that was kind of the narrative that Elaine was pushing, that was one of the main reasons he wanted to stay back, because he wanted to spend the holiday, with his grandmother, who might not make it to the next holiday. And
Right.
that certainly was a major factor for him. But just he's on Thanksgiving break. He's 13. He's got friends. He doesn't fucking want to go into the mountains with his
He has a
dad.
girlfriend. He has a
He's got
girlfriend
it.
that he's spending time with every day.
Exactly, dude. Like that's just not what 13-year-olds want to do. So it's like, well, they try, like, because those were kind of red herrings for me a little bit,
I do
and
think though that he did have that. Elaine said this, and it made sense to me based on Mark and his behavior, was that Dylan wanted to be out. He wanted to go do things. Mark did not. Mark wanted to be
right.
home watching TV.
And like I said, I mean, the state had a tough case. I mean, circumstantial cases are tough. When the state's trying to build their case and they have evidence trickling in, and they don't discover the first set of remains until like almost a year after Dylan's
Mhm.
gone missing, and then another couple of years go by before they discover the skull. And at that point they're trying to build a case, and it's like everybody in law enforcement liked Mark from the get, and it's one of those situations where they just don't have the evidence,
Which is
and
why you
it's
hear them kind of pleading with him to confess over and over and
totally,
over again. Yeah.
totally,
And
I
they're and,
mean,
they try to play on every possible angle. They're like, "Oh, you're a dad, you love your kid. If you love your kid, you're gonna tell us what really happened, even if it was an accident." Like, we
totally. Yeah, they took every angle, man. They took every
Mhm,
shot they could at him, like, from
mhm.
every emotional angle that they could come at him with. And,
It didn't work.
and for it didn't, because his time was his friend in his mind, Mark. The longer that it went,
Mhm.
like the more distant he became to the actual event. You know what I'm saying? So it was
Yeah.
like any kind of emotional leverage that they may have had on him early in terms of getting him to kind of fess it up, it's always going to happen closer in time to the event, because it's
Mhm.
like if you've got any kind of soul as a human being, and you're kind of a tortured soul at that point, if you've done something horrific like that, so that's something that you're dealing with on a daily basis, like all day every day. Like, I
Right.
just, and like me personally, I'm a terrible liar. Like I'm just not good at lying, so that wouldn't have been an option for me. Apparently Mark, he's a fucking sociopath, man. I mean, that there's no bones about
Yeah.
it. Fetishes and his weirdness aside, the guy just acted, I mean, he reminded me of Gacy, to be honest with you, the way that he was so remorseless, and it's like I get from his perspective why he's not trying to end up, in prison for the rest of his life. But man, it's your kid, it's just like, it's your kid. I just don't know. You've got to be, he's built differently than the rest of us,
He
it's like,
he has to be. I mean, there's just I can't fathom listening to him in those interview tapes. It's just like, how can you sit there
right.
and just,
It's crazy.
and he would go in and out between like the cool, fun, jovial guy to just
Right.
bold-faced lying and just making shit up, and
Totally.
he knows that they know that he's making shit up, and he doesn't care.
Oh, the bleeding cold sore. Yeah,
Oh, just kidding, it was a Nerf football. Come
yeah,
on.
I mean, dude, it's like the whole way, and he didn't have much time to kind of like play it out,
Mm-mm.
because you figure, let's assume that what went down is exactly what went down, that, and I'm assuming that he didn't really kill his child purposefully. I think it was a heated, it would have been like a second degree or a manslaughter charge. Like, I think the
Yeah.
state probably, if they wanted to take the safe route, could have downgraded the charge and probably had an easier time, like, mentally going in, because it's like, we know this guy did it, and we don't have the greatest evidence in the world, but we know he did it, and we just have to hope that the jury can see through this guy's bullshit. And so it's like you have that situation where, if they would have like kind of switched up the narrative and not gone with like the violent murdering, like hatchet man type narrative, and gone with, they got into it, it got physical. The guy, like you said, was already on tilt. because of
Mhm.
everything that had been going on with the just recently decided case. So, he was not in a good space. Plus, he's a raging alcoholic, and
Right.
I don't know when, like, I didn't hear much evidence about like what he had consumed that day, which to me is always a factor with respect to how people respond to certain things that are happening to them when they're intoxicated. And, I mean, I'm assuming this guy was drinking because that's what he did. He was,
Oh,
he
yeah.
was a beer, he was a beer drinking guy, man.
Oh, yeah. And
Um,
you hear him in the interviews, he is slurring all over the place,
all over the
like,
place.
and you're like, "Whoa, this guy is hammered."
It's really a fascinating case, man. And it's like one of
Yeah.
those cases where, you kind of sit back and you watch it develop, and, everyone has their own feelings on it. And I
Mhm.
can't imagine, just because of the way that he responded over the years with respect to his son being missing,
Yeah.
and, that everyone felt like he was the guy, and I think that everyone feels like it was the right result and that there was some justice done for Dylan. And, it's one of those things that we just never really know, though. It's like
Yeah.
I'm always like, man, I wish that every fucking guy that went in prison that always maintained their innocence on their deathbed, like that there was some kind of way that we could just
Mm.
force them to tell the truth. So we could always know. Like I would like to think that if I was like some kind of horrific person like that, that on my deathbed, I'd be like, you know what? I'm gonna tell you. But like people just don't do that. It's like I don't
So
know.
frustrating. The trial itself, I think you said it went 5 weeks?
Yeah.
It's kind of a blur for me because I was rushing every morning to wake up in time to go stream it on my YouTube channel, and
Right.
then, of course, everything would go wrong and technology would fail me, and
Of
then I'd be
course.
mad. But, yeah, it was hard to keep track of how long it went, but I remember it feeling like forever. It really did.
Dude, like, and imagine sitting on a jury. You know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
and that's one of the things when you're like trying a case like that. It's like you have to, because you're going to have witnesses that are explosive.
Mhm.
Like you're going to have the Elaines and the Brandons and the Coreys that get up there that are giving just heart wrenching, gut wrenching
Mhm.
testimony that will have the jury, all in. And then you'll have like I call it like the parade of experts where, the
Right.
juries just fucking fade out, man, because it's boring, and it's all esoteric, medical shit or
Mhm.
scientific shit that, unless you've got a scientist who's on the jury who's like, oh, this is fascinating. I mean, most of the people are going to be like, oof, how long is this going to go on? Those are the witnesses that make these types of things drag on, and it's like, when you're looking at it from the jury's perspective, and that's what I try to explain to my listeners, I'm like, look, theoretically, depending on the, kind of how high profile the case was,
Mhm.
they might not have heard any of the facts, so it's all
Sure.
new to them, and then you're trying to craft the narrative, and both sides have their stories, and both sides are trying to, basically prove them. And the concept of that you're innocent until proven guilty. And that's one of the things from like a defense attorney's perspective. It's not really like that. Like when I go in, I feel like I have to prove my guy's innocent, because, and that's one of the things like during voir dire, when I'm picking a jury, I'd be like, I need to know, like, if you've walked in here with a preconceived notion just by way of him being arrested and the fact that he's
Mhm.
in front of you, have you formed an opinion as to his innocence or guilt, just based on that alone? And, when people are being truthful because we're human beings, they're like, well, yeah, I mean, he's here. They definitely have some shit on him. So it's like, I'm already behind the eight ball, like before the trial's even begun, just by way of the guy sitting next to me,
Yeah, even if
you
the
know,
burden of proof is on the prosecution, it
right.
doesn't matter. You still have
Doesn't.
to find a way to poke holes in what they're saying.
Totally.
Eh, it sounds
Totally.
cute and nice, but it doesn't really work that
It,
way.
it- yeah, right. In reality, that's not how it fleshes out, man. And it's
Yeah.
like, from a defense attorney's perspective, the state has all the resources. I've been handling cases for people for 20 years, and I handle cases for way less than, I should be making in terms of the amount of work that goes into preparing properly for a trial, because I want people to have the opportunity to have good representation where they haven't been able to get it. You know, because like there's some great public defenders out there, but the bottom line is the public defenders have a massive caseload and they
They're
just
overworked
cannot.
and
And
underpaid.
totally, and they can't dedicate the time that they need to, that like a private attorney would be able to, because they don't have that caseload. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, and the state's got all the resources. They basically have everything that they need. There's like an endless supply of money in terms of getting experts in there.
Mhm.
There's an endless, outreach to law enforcement, anything that they need done. So it's like, as defense attorneys, if you've got a client that's basically indigent, I don't have any access to any of that. And then I'm going into court filing motion saying, look, I need the county to pay so I can get an expert to get this guy evaluated. And they're like, okay, well, I'm going to give you $2,500. So good luck. Find some hack to basically, you know what I mean? So and it's been like that, and soon find out that it's almost impossible because the red tape and just the power of the state is so overwhelming, and it's like, so it becomes very disheartening from our
Man,
perspective, like right away,
you're making me feel bad for Morin and Bogan, and I wasn't, but
Yeah.
you're right. They did have the odds against them in that situation, and the sheer amount of motions that were filed and the sheer
Oh,
amount of
dude.
exhibits that were brought forward. I mean, I would have a hard time knowing what exhibits were coming up and where they are in the binder and where they are in the
Totally.
computer. Like, it would be
Dude, it's
impossible. I had a
yeah,
hard
it's
time just producing this season.
yeah, man. I mean, and it's like it's overwhelming. Like if I was handling Mark's thing, I would just be focusing on the motion work, and I would have been focusing a lot more on everything that happened during the investigation. Like that's what I do. I focus on the constitutionality. That's what I defend, the Constitution as opposed to my guy, because I know I've done my job if I'm doing that, because that's really what the concern is a lot of times. Like I said in the beginning, you're defending the principles of the Constitution. Did the cops in investigating it do everything properly? And that's the way when people ask, well, how do you defend a monster like that? Well, that's how. I take whatever they may have done or what they did do out of
Mhm.
the equation in terms of me being able to kind of plunge forward and handle what I need to handle in order for
Focus
me
on
to
the
be.
procedure.
You have to, I
Yeah,
mean, because I'm a human, and I'm
yeah,
like an extremely, like I said, I'm an emotional guy, it's
yeah,
like and I have kids, and people matter to me, so it's like those are
yeah,
things that when I go into it. But there's so much shit with it, like in the criminal justice system, that like you need people that give a shit. You
yeah,
really do. It's like the worst guys are the bottom feeder scumbags that just go in and are trying to make a buck. Those guys are just like, and it doesn't matter what side they're on, whether they're prosecutor or defense, they're just a blight. And and there's just so many lawyers, and you're bound to have a bunch of really shitty lawyers, that give like
yeah,
everyone a bad name, and it's like that's all it takes. And you always hope, as flawed as our system is, that at the end of the day, that you're going to get some justice, and I know that your struggle, that you've been going through with what went on with your brother is just like fucking never ending and heartbreaking, man. It's like, coming from that side of it, like where it's just hit you like so hard personally, and having to try to like fucking change your focus into finding a way to get justice, to
mhm.
use that energy and that anger that's built up over your life, to try to like channel it into a way to try to make a difference. It's like, I love you, man. I just think you're a
Thank
fucking
you,
awesome guy, man. I really do.
thank you. I love you too. I respect you, and yeah, that means a lot. I kind of want to go down a little rabbit hole that could be risky
I love rabbit
with
holes
you.
though. I love it.
If you were going to represent Mark, what would you have done differently than what his team did?
And that's a tough one,
I know.
because it is, because when I look at a case like that, and I've got a case where I've got a guy who's basically just coming into my office and just denying, okay, he's denying involvement from the get.
Mhm,
And I start looking at the evidence, and I start looking at his demeanor, and I start looking at how he's been acting. And, I'm not a fucking robot. I'm a human. I have my
mhm,
own personal feelings. So in that type of situation, I probably would have tried to push Mark towards And this, of course, would have been, attorney-client privilege, and I would have,
Mhm.
like, knowing that he's not going to testify, because that's kind of the I should have prefaced, like, I don't ask my client if they did it if I think that they might have to testify, because I can't put them onto suborn perjury if I come up with an alternative defense. If they admit it to me, they're done. There's no way they go on the stand, because I would never put a
Sure.
client onto suborn perjury. So in that situation where I know that Mark is never going to testify because he could never help himself, I probably would have tried to go with a mental illness defense of some type, man. To be honest with you, I would have said, look, man, like, we can go with this thing, and I'm going to tell you how this is going to play out if we do it your way, where you're just going to say it wasn't me, it's going to animalate my kid. We're never going to be able to explain away how you acted after the fact. That's just not going away. And there's no rational explanation for it. No 12 people on the planet are going to buy this shit. You acted like a fucking person who killed his kid. That's how you did it. So why don't we contemplate getting an expert in here and have them maybe do a brain scan, maybe see what's going on with you. Maybe you've got some issues mentally. You've definitely got some mental illness going on top of it being exacerbated by your alcoholism and, whatever else you're doing. And I think, he was a guy that I probably would have taken an entirely different approach, and which ultimately might have been far more satisfying for a jury. There's never going to be an
Sure.
excuse for it, but, at least there is some acknowledgement of what happened, and then, trying to explain in that moment of absolute horror for both Mar, and then just change the narrative, change it from, like, I didn't fucking do it, and I acted like a total dick afterward, to, oh my God, it was like I just went through, like, the worst moment of my life.
Yeah, that creates an argument for lowering charges, right? That creates an
That's
argument for
totally.
yeah,
Totally.
yeah.
Totally, like that would have been my play, but, like, all the whole way, I would have said, "Look, man," like, I said, I would have gone, let's say theoretically, okay, I'm gonna
Mhm,
give you a hypothetical, Mark.
mhm,
Let's say that, Dylan got in, you guys were kinda on shaky footing, you knew that he had found this shit on you, and, that he was, he probably had some issues with you that were pretty deep-seated at this point. He gets out there, and it's awkward. You guys you're not feeling the love. And, you guys get back to the house, and, he had wanted to go over to his buddy's house. You quash that. You're like, nah, it's not happening. You just got here. You're staying with me tonight. You know what I mean? It's like,
mhm.
which is, I'm sure, exactly what went down. The
Yeah.
kid probably was like, I want to hang out with my friends, man,
Mhm,
So, and then it just turned physical. Like, and it was done unintentionally. It was, it got physical. You shouldn't have put hands on Dylan, but you did, and there was a physical altercation, and it got out of hand. And, like, I threw him. I just tossed him to kind of get him off me because he was attacked. Whatever, however it would have played out in terms of what the story was. But then you don't have a jury looking at this guy like he's just like the piece of shit that he is.
mhm,
You have a father who mishandled massively a situation that had boiled over, and it got physical, and a
mhm.
terrible accident happened. To me, that would have been the better approach if I was like, because
Yeah,
I would have sold them on that by saying, look, if I can get them to drop that to a manslaughter or, a second degree, you're not looking at spending the rest of your life in prison,
right,
and you're going to do, because and you're not going to win this case the way
right.
that you want to handle it, dude. That's what I would have gone with, that approach with him. And I would have hoped to have convinced him of it, but, at the end of the day, he would have been found guilty just as well. But
Yeah,
I think people would have been satisfied. There would have been much more palatable, for like for Elaine, for his brothers, to just have this guy admit it, and just there were extenuating circumstances, and it got out of control. And I obviously didn't mean to kill him. It just,
right.
and so, like, that's probably how I would have gone about it, man. It seems like the right approach in that particular case, because as much as it was entirely circumstantial, there's no other explanation. That's the key. I don't give a shit what the evidence is. I don't give a shit how crappy the DNA or the dog sniff and all that shit is. There's no other explanation. There's no like you're the last guy to see him, and the kid vanished off the face of the earth. There's no like, and there's no viable explanation.
And I think that the prosecution did a really good job of pointing that out and saying, like, this kid replied within minutes to
Instantly,
everybody that he wanted
all
to
the
talk
time,
to
all the
all the
time,
time.
all the time.
And so he never responded to you for 2.5 months, but he was constantly in contact with people that he cared about.
Right,
And
his
for him
friends,
to
his family,
yeah,
immediately. It's
and for
like,
him to
like,
drop off like that, it was unheard of.
9:37,
Mhm.
that's when it happened. Like, that's like that number is, like, burned in my brain,
Same.
that's the last time the kid ever made any contact with anybody, and we're talking about a 13-year-old at 9:30 at night. Nope.
No way.
It's not how it happens, man. That's
No
not
way.
how it works. My 16-year-old's up till 3 in the morning. That's the reality of that situation. That's like none of it added up, man, and there was just no other reasonable explanation. So it's like, I don't know. When I get a case in like that, I try to look at it from every angle. I look at the strength of the state's case, and I said, look, I know you're sitting here telling me you didn't do it, but I need you to seriously think about what I'm going to discuss with you right now. And, I want you to sleep on it for a few nights and think about this approach. And,
Mhm.
I think this might be the way to go. And, that's certainly what I would have done in that case. I would have put on a completely different case. If Mark would have persisted that he didn't do it, I would have had to put on the same bullshit case. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? I would have had to have done that. And basically the only move that they had was try to attack the science,
Right.
because there's
And
there's
they
no
did.
way they did. I mean, that was really their only move, because,
Mhm.
him trying to like come on, like he came off disingenuous, the defense attorney did in the
Oh, for
closing,
sure.
oh, big deal. Oh, it's a big deal that he's walking 2 feet behind his dad and like what
Yeah.
13. I'm like, dude, that's not the approach. That's not how you're getting the jury to think that this guy didn't do it, man. Like my approach would have been vastly different than his, but it would essentially have been the same defense. I mean, because it's all I would have had if I couldn't talk Mark into doing what I would have thought would have been the better approach. You
Yeah.
know, I would have certainly tried, and I don't know that these guys didn't, but I have a feeling that they did not.
It's hard to say. It's possible that they did try and he
Yeah,
he turned them down knowing
totally.
how he is, right? One of the things that really bothered me about Bogan is he had this tendency to snicker at
Oh my
people.
god, right?
Like
Like it,
while
like
he's
during it, like
while he's
yeah,
cross-examining them.
and during
he-
the closing, like in
Yeah.
this whole thing where he puts his hands over his face and he's like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, dude, this is not the time to laugh.
No.
There's like, in some cases, I'll try to inject a little humor if it's a long
Mhm.
case, but I'm certainly not laughing inappropriately, dude, same. I felt the exact same way, like, especially during the closing,
Yeah.
like where
Yeah.
he's just like laughing at like how, like, oh, how ridiculous this is, it's just like, it's not like you're not going to ingratiate yourself with the jury when you're doing that shit, man. It's not
Yeah,
how
I
you
think that
handle it.
that I don't think that helped at all.
It
I
did
think the
not. There's no
jury
way.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
came off
definitely did.
really bad.
It did. It's
Yeah.
like, because you know what they always say, in the law game is like, if the law is against you and the facts are against you, you got to basically, it boils down to, you got to make the jury like you more than they like the prosecutor.
Mhm.
And like, he did not do that. You don't need to do it that way. You can kind of pick their case apart without demeaning them, which,
Yeah.
like him kind of like inappropriately laughing throughout the entire trial with that
Mhm.
weird snicker thing that he did was just horribly misplayed. But that might just be his personality, and the guy's not like a great trial lawyer. I mean, it's hard trying cases. You're
Yeah.
acting, like it's like, I don't know. I think I remember telling you about this. I was like, that was one of the things that I felt like prepared me to be a podcaster, to tell stories, because it's what I do.
Mhm.
I tell a story. I'm telling a story, and I try to do it in a way that's compelling. And,
Yeah.
so like that kind of like trained me to do what we do. You know what I mean? And it
Sure.
was like, he's just not a very good storyteller. You know what I mean? At the end of the
Agreed.
day. But yeah, man, dude, yeah, his demeanor was off for sure. And sometimes it's hard. Like, strategically, how you handle a witness, it makes such a big difference, man. It's tough, man. I mean, it's a tough gig.
I think that people forget a number of things, right? I think that people forget, first of all, that this is real life. When they're into true crime, they forget that this is the worst day of somebody's life
Yep.
or the worst day of multiple people's lives that we're
Yep.
talking about. They also forget that the people in the justice system are human,
Yep.
right? And
Yep.
and that they're going with the best intentions sometimes and doing the best that they can for the most part. There are probably
Right.
exceptions to that. But at the same time, like, the system itself is flawed because people are flawed, right?
Of course.
Not because not
100%.
because the Constitution's flawed or any of those other things are flawed. It's just that people are flawed. And so
Fundamentally flawed,
and I
you
think we
know?
want everything to be tied up in a nice, neat box,
Yeah.
and then put away so we don't have to think about it. But
Right.
that's not how it works in real
It's
life.
not how it works at all, man. It's like
Yeah.
that's so poignant that you said that, and that's so true, and I'm always trying to make that point to people, and it's not just the lawyers, it's the judge, like everybody involved in that process is a human being.
Mhm.
You don't have any idea what's going on in their life and their private life, and those things affect all of us as we
Yeah.
you know work from day to day. It's like we drag our personal shit into
Mhm.
work. So certainly the system's flawed, like in
Yeah.
terms of, because like follow the fucking money is
Mhm.
just unfortunately how the world runs, man. Like
Yeah.
like for everything, you follow the money. You follow the money, and it's no different in
Mhm.
the criminal justice system. But like when you're getting down into the minutia of it, like in any kind of individual case, yeah, you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
Everybody's a person. Everybody is like, we're not robots, and
Right.
no one is. Like the jury, they're not robots. The judge, everyone's got emotions. Everyone's got feelings. Everyone's got thoughts. Everyone's got
Yeah.
biases. Everyone. So those are all things that you try to factor in, and you just try to do the best job that you can, typically
Sure.
from both sides of
And
it.
and listeners and viewers of true crime, I think it's really easy to see things from the 1,000-foot view, the 10,000-foot view that the people involved in those situations didn't have the luxury of having, right?
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, dude.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like when you're in the
Yeah.
shit in the moment, it's completely different. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's like you said, man. It's like you're looking at a situation when you're watching Discovery ID that's
Mhm.
all after the fact, and it doesn't seem real because it seems like you're watching a movie. But
Yep.
in reality, these were all just like exactly like you said, this is somebody's absolute worst day of their life,
Mhm.
probably multiple
Mhm.
people's worst day of their life that they're talking about. And, that has to be taken into consideration all the time. And it's like, it's hard, and
It is.
like for what we do professionally, it's different, because we take
Mhm.
these deep dives into these cases, and we're able to kind of inject ourselves into the situation and look at it in a different way, which I think is the beauty of podcasting. Like there's
Yeah.
just no other medium that can do what we can do. That's
Yeah.
why people love it, especially the true crime game, man. It's
Mhm.
like they can't do that in documentaries. They just can't. They don't have the time. They don't have the ability to be able to dive in like we can. And we get to inject our own mores and
Yeah.
those types of things into what we're saying in order to try to give context. And people may agree or disagree with what we're saying or how we feel about it, but nonetheless,
Mhm.
it creates a dialogue, and it
Yeah.
creates thought,
Yeah.
which is like, to me, dialogue is always the way to go about anything. And like people can disagree on shit. That's what makes it amazing to be a human being. I mean, it would
Yeah.
suck if we all thought the exact same way about everything. I mean,
Yeah. I can barely tolerate myself. I don't need more of me. So I wanna circle back to the trial
yep.
and then get your closing thoughts, and then we'll wrap this
Okay.
up. So, okay, so the trial wrapped up in 5 weeks.
Yep.
Mark Redwine was found guilty of both charges that he was brought to trial for, and he
Correct.
was sentenced to the maximum 48 years, which is the most that he could have received for those charges. So I'm so grateful that the outcome was what it was and that it worked out that way because I was getting nervous that there was some reasonable doubt being sewed into there, but
Right.
it seems like the jury, again, saw through a lot of it and saw Mark for who he was, and so I'm very
Exactly.
grateful for that. I wanna get your final thoughts, and then I want you to wrap it up with telling my listeners how to find you.
Okay. So, you know, uh, essentially kind of what I've liked to, so Mark, I'm sure, has filed his notice of appeal,
Mhm.
and there's the whole appellate process. But And you and I had talked about like kind of going into this that we would have loved to have been able to get the transcripts. Like when I can pour through the transcripts to try to determine if there's any kind of real issue, like an appellate issue,
Mhm.
and like I don't know if your listeners know, but like when you hear lawyers objecting at trial, okay, like the purpose of that is that they are basically creating an appellate issue. So when you hear an objection, it's not just like they're trying to break the flow. I mean, it has that added benefit sometimes,
Mhm.
but typically, like anytime you hear an objection at trial, that's because they're saying, look, a rule of evidence has been broken. Okay. And that rule of evidence was crucial to the case. And now my client's not getting a fair trial or what have you. So anytime you hear those objections, they're critical. Like it's so, like, say, for instance, if his attorneys hadn't objected to anything, he would literally not have any appellate issues because it's considered waived. So if you don't object at trial, it's done. There's no
Wow.
going. Yeah. So that's like the like in like that's the kind of shit that I try to explain in my show. It's like because when people are watching trials, they're like, oh my God,
Mhm.
why do they keep having these fucking sidebars? And why does the guy keep fucking objecting all the time? And and sometimes it is done to stop a flow. Like if you've got a
Mhm.
devastating cross examination or a direct examination with a witness who's just destroying your client, and you're like, oh my God, I've got to try to do something
Yeah.
like slow their roll. In that case, it might be that. But so, when you and I talked about getting the transcripts, like that would have allowed me to kind of go in and be like, all right, like Eric, you don't have to worry. This guy's got no real appellate issues, so not knowing, but we watched like a lot of the trial,
Mhm.
and anything that I didn't see anything in terms of us having to be worried about this thing being reversed on appeal and getting kicked back to the trial court to retry it. And that, because that's typically what happens. Like if it gets reversed on appeal, it gets kicked back to the trial court and they typically retry the case. So it's not like if they went on appeal they're free. They
Right.
basically just say, well, all right, we're tossing that trial. So
Well, that could
based on
take
everything,
years and
years,
years too, right?
dude. Yeah,
Yeah.
years. It
Yeah.
does take years. It takes years, and they're really hard to win. Like it's got to be pretty egregious. It's typically got to be something that is so egregious that the defendant just truly didn't get a fair trial. Because like the appellate court abhors sending shit back to retry it because it's a drain on the system,
Mhm.
and so it's got to really be a compelling issue where they felt like, "Oh, yeah, man." I mean, and it's typically if the state fucks up during their case in chief, like that's typically where like a horrible mistake is made, or like something that is like that whole you can't unring a bell process, or that I'm talking about,
Mhm.
where like something is said that's going to impact the jury to the point where they're not going to be able to be unbiased because of what they heard. Because like a judge will give an instruction, you are not to, like, everything that guy just said, you can't listen to it. Well, like you were just saying, we're all human beings. It doesn't work like that. It
Mm-mm.
doesn't work like that. Like one of my go-to tricks is, like if I've got something I know that I can't necessarily get in because they're going to object to it, I try to get as much of it out just so the jury can hear it before the objection comes, because you can't unring a bell. You just
Mhm.
can't. It's like it's there. The judge will give the instruction. You are not allowed to use that, but subconsciously it's there. The seeds
It's there.
planted,
Yeah.
totally. So, in terms of his appellate process, I don't think that's going to go anywhere. I think he's done. In terms of Mark Redwine, I think that's probably going to be the last we're going to see of him. And I hope that that family, Elaine and his brothers are, find some kind of solace in that, because it's such a devastating thing to lose somebody like that, and you hope that that gives them some kind of relief. And it's probably a little bit of a hollow relief, but it's
Yeah.
relief nonetheless. And at least there was some justice, and he didn't. We say that he didn't die in vain, but he really did.
You did.
It's clearly something that didn't have to happen. And I think it's one of those things where you kind of really have to examine like what you were looking at initially. This case really didn't start on November 12th, man, or 18th, whatever day it was. It
18th.
started
Yeah.
in that divorce court. and
Mhm.
that's when this case started. And maybe when you have cases like this, that's because it took years, man, for them to like start really acknowledging, women just being in these abusive relationships to where they really started drafting statutes to protect them,
Mhm.
because in the 40s and the 50s and the 60s, when women were essentially powerless and stuck in these abusive
In the
marriages,
80s.
and oh my God, the 80s, and I mean, still now, to be honest with you, I mean, yes,
Mhm.
women have come a long way, but they're still not where they need to be, in terms of equality. And it's one of those things where you hope that the law starts to evolve and catch up with where we need to be as a society. So it's like you have these types of cases where you have a situation like that where they have to start addressing the potential of what can happen. And I realize that we don't have crystal balls, but like with a guy like that, and and she had done what she could do. She went and got the OP, and it still didn't help. And it's like, I was sitting there thinking, to be honest with you, and this is going to be my last thought on it. I'm like, as soon as they discovered those pictures, like if I were Elaine, I would have been going into my attorney and saying, okay, I want King Dylan added to the order of
Mhm.
protection. This guy's what he does in his personal life until it bleeds into what my son knows about him, and he is off. Like there's something off with you. Like you know what I mean? And like I think there would have been enough there to where a judge would have probably granted that OP where Dylan was a protected party. Because that's kind of like where my mind went with it, because it's like the whole thing where the judge is like, well, he was ordered. Well, yeah, I mean, the parenting agreement is a court order, but like she had an avenue. She were my client. I'm saying, okay, well, I'm filing an order of protection. I'm not sending that fucking kid out there. He's not stable, like
Yeah.
he's just not, so, and it probably would have been granted. At the very least, I would have gotten a temporary order of protection. And if we had to go to the plenary hearing,
Mhm.
seeking a 2-year order, it would have stopped it, because it's like, so it's a terrible tragedy. I mean, I'm with you. I'm incredibly relieved that the jury came back the way they did on a tough case for the state, because it was all circumstantial. But
Yeah.
I'm with you. I feel like justice was done to the extent that it could be. But notwithstanding that, it was still just a horribly tragic case. And so, and I thank you for letting me weigh in on it, man.
Thank you for joining and for giving such amazing insights. I'm so grateful for this. I've learned so much. I hope my listeners have learned something too. Tell my listeners how to find you.
So yeah, the pod's called Defense Diaries. The whole first season is basically a serialized, very long, but very interesting. We've tried to do a good job with it, and I think that we've accomplished that. But it's a really deep dive into the John Wayne Gacy case. I know Eric has told you guys about it. My dad was Gacy's lawyer back in '78, gave me those tapes. So we tried to, like I said early on, we tried to do something a bit different with it. And I think that we came up with an entirely new narrative of that case. So,
Yeah.
but it's densely packed. We try to fill it with a lot of information. It's not a casual listen. There's no bantering and laughing and chatting and shit. We're packing it in. So like if you start drifting off like I do when I listen to podcasts, just thinking about something, you're gonna have to rewind it because you'll miss
Yeah.
all
You're
kinds
gonna
of
miss it.
information.
You're gonna
You
miss
will,
it.
so,
Yeah.
but and yeah, so it's Defense Diaries. We're available on every platform. And if you listen and enjoy it, like Eric said, and for him as well, because it means so much to us in terms of us kind of getting out to the world at large, those ratings and reviews, especially on Apple and now on Spotify,
Mhm.
are huge for us. So if you enjoy what we do and appreciate the hard work that we put into these things for you guys, the tiny gift that you can give us to pay back is take a couple minutes of your time and just click that 5 stars. And if you have a couple more minutes to just write something, that lets other people know that are looking for podcasts, because there's so many of them, that, what we bring to the table is something that's worth their time. So, for both Eric and I, that's absolutely huge. And it's massively appreciated by both of us.
Thank you for listening and watching. I'm so grateful for all of you. You make this the best job that I could have ever asked for. So thanks for sticking with me through this story and for staying here and for listening. Thank you, Bob, so much for your participation here. I had a great time talking about this case with you, and I would love to have you back
I'd
anytime in the
love to come
future.
back, man. Like at any time, dude. And I mean that sincerely. I'll always love to collab with you, man. And I
Nice.
guarantee you we'll be doing some live shit together out there too. So
Oh, for sure.
I missed the last one, but I'm not mixing like the next one I'm not missing. So
Oh,
yeah,
yeah. It's a good
it's the
time.
beginning of a beautiful friendship, man. So
Absolutely.
I'm super thankful that you put me on, and I'm grateful, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to weigh in.
Sure. And I just want to tell my listeners and viewers that if you think you know anything about the John Wayne Gacy case, think again. That's all I'm going to say. Listen to Bob's show. You
Thanks,
might learn
man.
something different that you didn't even know happened. So, and with that, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Stay safe, New Mexico.